Good morning, y'all. We are back in the prophet Isaiah, looking at chapters 4, 5, and 6 today. But primarily, I actually just want to focus on chapter 6, which is Isaiah, his call to become a prophet. This is one of the most amazing chapters of the whole Bible, and it explains how Isaiah came to be a prophet of God. Now, if you read through it, it's pretty simple. The gist of the story is that Isaiah goes into the temple in Jerusalem, presumably to go and worship the Lord. But instead of seeing, the altar and the priest and the high priest and all the Levites and helpers and stuff, instead he sees God Almighty. And the train of his robe, the end of his robe, fills the whole temple. And there's smoke, and there's fire, and there's earthquakes. And around the throne of God, Isaiah sees these angels called Seraphim. Seraphim is Hebrew for the burning ones. And these angels are weird in description. They have 6 wings. With 2 wings, they're covering their feet. With 2, they're covering their faces, and 2, they're flying, and they're booming out, crying out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory." This is, if you go fast forward to Revelation, this is exactly the same thing, that we see the people around God's throne declaring about who God is, that God is holy. That means He's set apart. There's no one like Him. And the whole earth is full of His glory. What that means is your glory is your weightiness, that which makes you significant. And these angels are saying that it's not just God's throne where God is glorious and enthroned and majestic and powerful. We're not just the temple. It's not just Israel, but the whole earth belongs to God. The whole earth is His. And He shows Himself to the inhabitants of the whole earth, which is a theme that we'll get into later on. And so Isaiah sees this. He sees God. He sees these seraphim flying around. And how does he respond? Well, he falls on his face and he cries out, "Woe is me." Now, I like to picture Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted's when he's like, "Whoa!" But it's probably not like that. This is probably a cry of sadness and fear. Why? Well, Isaiah tells us himself. He says, "For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the Lord Almighty." What Isaiah is basically saying is that he recognizes his unworthiness compared to this God who is holy and glorious and set apart. And he realizes that he's fallen short, he's broken, he's sinful, and he's come into the very presence of God. And the overall thought in the Hebrew mind is that when you have someone who is unholy, unclean, sinful, broken, in the presence of God who is holy, clean, perfect, complete, well, those two things aren't compatible. So Isaiah is recognizing that he's a dead man. He's a dead man. And he thinks this is what's going to happen, that because he's seen God, boom, his life will be snuffed from him. But something strange happens. An angel, one of these seraphim, flies to the fire, the altar in the temple, where there is incense burning, and he takes a coal with some tongs, and he flies to Isaiah and puts this coal on his mouth. But instead of having the effect that you think it would have, that Isaiah's mouth gets burned and he's destroyed and he feels pain, the exact opposite happens, that he is cleansed and he is made whole, and that it doesn't matter that he's sinful and unclean, because God has come and healed him, saved him, rescued him, made him new again. This is what this act symbolizes. And the very next, so that's how Isaiah encounters God. And then he receives this call. As soon as this happens, this healing, this forgiveness happens, God calls from the throne, "Now, who will I send? And who will go for me?" Which is weird, right? Because Isaiah at this point is probably the only person in the room besides the angels and God. But God sends out this universal call, which is open, I think, for everyone, that says, okay, I'm God, I'm holy, my glory fills the whole earth, but who is going to be that person who tells others about me? And Isaiah, I think, just by realizing what has just happened to him and seeing God's very presence, sticks his hand up in the air and says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Here I am. In the midst of this, seeing God's presence, realizing God's beauty, receiving God's forgiveness, his instant response is, "I'll go. I'll do it." But then we get to this very strange part, which is verses 9 to 13, where God gives Isaiah the message that he's going to share. And this is what he says. Isaiah, this is what you're going to tell people, verses 9 and 10, that the people that you're going to talk to, they're going to be ever hearing but never understanding, ever seeing but never really perceiving, that their hearts are going to be calloused, their ears dull, their eyes closed, what's that all about? And he says, otherwise, God, this is God speaking, otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts, and they may be turned and healed. Which is this great question. Why would you send a prophet with this message? That declaring that, look, I'm going to talk to you guys, but you're never really going to get it. And the reason why you're never really going to get it is I don't want you to get it, because you might turn and receive forgiveness. What is that all about? We'll get into this in a later video as well. But then Isaiah, he's clearly confused by this whole situation. So he asked God, how long am I going to have to give this message? And then God goes on and he tells him that until everybody has experienced God's wrath, essentially, until the cities lie ruined without inhabitant, and the houses are left deserted, and the fields are destroyed, until everyone the Lord has sent far away to a land that's going to be forsaken. So Isaiah, or God, is seeing that these people are going this certain direction. They've abandoned him at this point. They don't want to listen. And so Isaiah is going to be sent to these people who aren't going to listen, and God expects them not to respond, and they're not going to respond for Isaiah's whole lifetime in his whole message, because the thing that he's talking about actually happens much later on in history, about the fall of the people of Jerusalem and the exile that happens. And so this is going to happen for a long time, which leads us with this question: what is this about, and how did it get here? Again, for the sake of brevity, we'll get into this in a later video, but it begs us the question, or two things we ought to think about. One is that Isaiah's call to be a prophet, to be a spokesperson of God, simply comes from experiencing forgiveness. And if you and I have experienced that same forgiveness, we have seen God's glory, are we putting our hands up like Isaiah and saying, "Here I am, God, send me"? If not, why not? Secondly, how do you cope with the idea that Isaiah was sent to preach to people this message saying, look, I'm going to talk to you, but you're really not going to get it. And the reason why you're not going to get it is God doesn't really want you to get it, because you might experience his forgiveness. What do we do with that? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to leave that with us to wrestle with. But as we jump further into the prophetic books, this is going to become more and more clear, all the way to leading to Jesus. Because Jesus himself quotes this same message when the disciples ask him, "Why do you speak in parables? Why don't you just speak clearly and plainly. And this is the same answer that Jesus gives. So meditate on those two questions, and we'll hit it up more in a later video. See you later. Bye.